Hello, my name is Rory Dunne, and today I'll be discussing the article Does Antitrust Enforcement in High-Tech Markets Benefit Customers by Joshua D. Wright. This is a part of the George Mason University Law and Economics Research Papers series. So, just a quick overview before we get into the meat and potatoes. We'll be discussing antitrust enforcement and whether it's beneficial or a negative aspect to the customer when it comes to getting the best price available. We'll be discussing a really good example for showing this in the Intel versus AMD lawsuit, and then we'll be going over everything we learned and bringing it to a conclusion at the very end. So, to start, I'm going to be talking about antitrust laws and the enforcement of those laws. A lot of times in a new industry, the enforcement of antitrust laws is ramped up heavily. And what this causes is a slowdown in innovation and it creates a chilling effect. But the thing is innovation is very critical in these new industries for them to heavily expand and quickly. And so us as a customer, we need to ask ourselves, what's more important to us? The healthy expansion of the innovation inside an industry or the enforcement of the antitrust laws? Now, who exactly are the ones enforcing these laws? That would be the Federal Trade Commission. Now, when we are doing an evaluation to see if a business is following the guidelines set by the FTC, we can do this in two different ways. We can do an ex post evaluation and an ex ante evaluation. An ex post evaluation is done after the entire costing period and gives us a broad look at what we want to look for. And an ex ante evaluation is done during the costing period distinguished and gives us a more narrow, more intricate view. Now, from an economic and analytical perspective, the potential harms that are associated with exclusive dealing contracts are quite similar to the harms that are associated with loyalty discounts. Now, that can make us look at them in a very questionable light. And if we want to question them even more, we could also look into see what a monopolist might do with loyalty discounts. They might utilize these to fortify their market position and raise rival costs of distribution, and they would ultimately harm the customer by putting competitors out of business. And now the FTC should, of course, monitor monopolies and break them up, but they should also minimize the social cost and maximize the social benefits of antitrust enforcement. And they could do this by crafting and applying rules in the context of whatever given business they're researching. So now I'm going to be starting to go over some content about the case. The case was Intel versus AMD, and AMD was arguing that the loyalty discounting given to original equipment manufacturers or OEMs were incentive to buy from Intel exclusively and was an exclusive dealing agreement. In cases like these, it's the job of the plaintiff, which in this case is AMD, to bear the burden of demonstrating that the contracts harm them directly and also increase their costs and harm their competition. Now, these claims are very hard to back up, as there are pros to cons to Intel's discounts. Some of the pros were that they offered OME lower prices, which were then passed on to customers. And they also increased access to customers, which led to more price reduction. Some of the cons were that Intel entered into an anti competitive arrangement that was actually designed to limit or foreclose other manufacturers. Now, the FTC made some predictions based off the information. Their first was that Intel's loyalty discounts with OMEs would reduce AMD's share in the microprocessing market. And their second was that AMD's margins, sales, revenues, and profits would fall as its scale decreased and costs increased. But once we look at the data, none of these predictions are backed up. AMD actually had a significant amount of expansion during the costing period being analyzed, and as their financials are very variable, they actually trend upwards. Now, the standard metrics do not paint a very good picture for AMD, but what can the alternative metrics tell us? Well, unfortunately for AMD, they tell us much of the same. We look for any abnormal jumps in stock price or any abnormal returns, and we do not see any from Intel. But when we begin to look at AMD's internal conflict, we begin to come to some conclusions. AMD had invested billions of dollars into research and development the same year they released their Barcelona quad-core processor, which had major design flaws on release and was losing them tons of money. When we look at these metrics, we can begin to see that AMD didn't have diminishing returns because of Intel. They had diminishing returns because of themselves and their internal workings and decision making. So we're back to the original question. Is the enforcement beneficial or negative to the customer? And the example of Intel versus AMD shows that sometimes a false positive can really chill the innovation side of an industry and actually harm consumers. And through the alternative and standard metrics we use to find information, we can conclude that Intel's practices did not harm the customer.